Okay, today is October 10th, 2022. Welcome to Native Calgarian and Chapters in Chat Book Club. Oki, Nagana Go, Mekoche Chestakom Aki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south in the opposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bugani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7. Oh, I have to admit somebody that was signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous or treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. It is really important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest, acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage all to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a Treaty 7 partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you won't acknowledge your local Indigenous nation's name, won't say your pronouns, your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why as settlers that call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winte's book Unreconciled really highlighted and showcased a lot of this. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin. I try to say my name in my language of Dekot Nagot Tine Siku to see if, to try to honor my people, the Satu Dene. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tinne Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, another English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower, a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous people's inherent rights, Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2 LGBTQ2+ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. So I have a lot more I'd love to say, but I think it's just really important that we get going here for our podcast or for our book club, which will be made into a podcast. So for folks who are new here, we just ask that Indigenous people speak first. And I spoke with Clarence Louie today, and he actually can't come. He says, I'm so sorry, I should have emailed you weeks ago. As I am tribal chair of the Okanagan Nation, I have a notice for my people on the US side to have an emergency meeting today in Castleguard, BC, 3 hours east of Osoyoos today at 2. I told them it's Thanksgiving and it's a holiday. Since they live in the States, they would not have known this. I asked them to pick a new date, but they couldn't. So I'm driving out on that emergency meeting. I'm sorry to cancel tonight's Zoom gathering. It sucks. My deepest apologies. And I said, Chief, you are in leadership and these things happen because of your position. Leadership means sacrificing and you do that for your people. I appreciate you wanting to even be with us. I'll let folks know and I'm sure they'll understand too. Safe travels, Chief, until we cross paths again. So that was the interaction we had today. So I apologize to my crew that he couldn't come, but I'm sure you do understand why he couldn't be here. So I'm just going to share my screen because we have a TED Talk that I think it's important that we listen to that. So, all right. And let's try to share the screen. I have a few things going on. I got a message that one of our folks will have to leave us here, so that's all right. Work is work. What do? You gotta work, you gotta work. Okay, we're gonna share sound and optimize for video clip, share. And we're gonna go here and we're gonna go here now. Let's press play.
I also want to thank
somebody
you for showing.
Just let me know if you can hear this. I can't see if anybody's nodding along, but if you could just unmute yourself and say, yep.
Yes, we can hear it.
Thank you, someone.
Sounds like there's a bit of an echo, but we can hear it.
Okay. Maybe I'll see if I, maybe it's my mic. Thank you for that.
TED Talks. Memorial. There's even white guys. It's good for the Lakota people. That story that you just saw in Canada as well. 8th year reserves are the reservation system on both sides of the United States going back created same place. The issue Canada, but for of the Okanagan people for 10,000 years was occupied by the Penticton. And it's good to see that more and more companies they're starting to recognize issues of the First Nations people and cannot be swept away. Are those people that elect them, the leadership in this country, are the non-native conflict that still happens, not only in England, are in all of the Americas, did not end. So I'll be going over some of, we've got to acknowledge our mistakes. I like personal mistakes, acknowledging our national mistakes, errors that we've missed of the doctrine of discovery. The myth of the melting has been trying for over 500 years in North America into this American melting. People have resisted that and will continue to. Is that the founding people in the English got here? Archaeological evidence would clearly say that that is the honor of the crown, that the leadership in this country gathers in Ottawa, the crown. So I'm going to quickly go over Canada, the people of this land. That is the biggest injustice and has to face of the United States at leaders overseas, happening in other countries. When in their own back, most First Nations people are with unemployment rates that in your history schools and how bad it was. I run into people in this Great Depression that they remember, at the highest unemployment rate during faced in Canada, in the US is around today. Most 50%. I was in reserves are at 80%. And yet, something happens in the world, the leadership of this country starts pointing their fingers. Premiers to start looking in their own backyard first, as it has ever happened on this soil. Leaders of the black, this soil has ever known. When he said, injustice anywhere, diversity, all talk about the injustices of the tribes. All of the tribes that sit along the 49th border there without our permission. Border. The Canadians have 7 Okanagan bands on this side of the border, but so every time I pass this people, Ojibwe people, same thing. And when I go past this international organization, highly respected organization, I love what this, every person should use this 4-way test in everything that you, 4-way test. First question on any issue is it the truth? Build goodwill. Is it benefit? If we can't get by the first tests, so in the creation of Canada in that side of the border, and when I cross and I see that other flag, what's the truth? Always looked at as an inconvenience to manifest destiny, a way of progress. Native American, the Indian problem in his documents. The first Indian problem. That's what it is. There is still an Indian problem in Canada. When I not discover an inhabited land, otherwise I could cross the Atlantic. If white people can come over here and discover, now we go over to the French and claim it. But maybe these rules, the fact is, we were called savage newspapers of the country of Canada. and they to possess, but who really are the savages? And the fact is, Canada and the United States tainted with millions upon millions of tribal. Even when he wanted to put the Canadian dream that raved our people into signing those treaties, historically documents the starvation. The Prime Minister was mentioned to him about the natives are starving on the prairie. He called the Indian people beggars and did big actions so that our people, the Cree, sign in those numbered treaties. Harold Cardinal wrote this book called The Unjust Society. Representatives fooled our people. The Queen, we heard stories about the honor. The Queen Mother has never looked after us. The last meeting of the Trumanton this past week. Canada and the United residential schools in Canada. After Prime Minister, President schools in the States and residential schools in Canada. People young, Indian band, in the Oaken Cranbrook. People young. That we don't care about the facts. I'm not going to apologize about the residential school system put in place for 100 years. Can't ignore the First Nation issues in this country. There's still a widespread gap. The youngest, and I'm going towards self-sufficiency. I don't want the provinces in the federal government. And we need a shift in focus from Indian affairs towards business development on the reserves. Because the government people, I want my people to have what most people have, and that's a job, life. And I'm going to push for that and still maintain my Indianness. The president is talking about better relations with the tribes, and also at the foundation of this is to recognize maybe we need some karma in all this stuff to happen. Maybe that's what we need. But this Jesse Jackson quote reminds me of what has to happen here in Canada. If you want peace, all this natural resource development in this country, then there better be justice. And our chiefs have been talking about that. Nobody gave us any rights. That's another myth out there. Nobody gives Native people rights. The government gives us rights. So our people, the sound of the drum is going to come back. Our Canada. And we're going to work through these issues, this unfinished business, these unfinished treaty issues. And I ask the Canadian people to uphold the honor of the crown that our chiefs keep on hearing about. Our federal officials, they bring out the honor of the crown. And I tell my people, we need hunters for jobs. We need the modern education to help us get to the same standard of take for granted. To dream about jobs, but never to forget. Custer died for your sins. That this country has been sick ever since. Now I'll close off. To my dedicated mess of non-native problems between the provinces and the states, and the fastest growing population in Canada. Today, over 150 Indian reserves don't even have the fastest growing population going to participate in the is that we get those reservations have a chance to participate, and that's being on the internet. The country is ever always right. So I say time is now to do the right thing.
There we go. All right, I hope y'all enjoyed that. So I wanted to read a piece of his book just to honor where we live. I thought it was really important that we acknowledge his contribution here to the Treaty 7.
Good things come to those who wait, but would you wait to eat an ice cream cone on a hot day? No. So don't wait to start earning 4.75% interest on eligible deposits with a Simply Financial high interest savings account. Limited time offer.
I managed to do that.
Visit Simply at SIN.
Sorry about that, folks. I'm just going to close that because I don't trust YouTube under the best of circumstances. All right, dropping a few things here. Okay, so yeah, I thought it would be really important for us to read this part where he did this buffalo run, because he obviously had a good education here at the University of Lethbridge. So I just wanted to read this. Leadership takes time to develop. There's no such thing as an instant leader. My first involvement in Native activism was in 1980 when I was still at the University of Lethbridge. Some of the res boys from the Blood Tribe west of Lethbridge organized a demonstration treaty run from Blackfoot Crossing, the site of Treaty 7 negotiations back in 1877, all the way to Ottawa. In Ottawa, there was going to be a special meeting of the National Indian Brotherhood, later renamed to the Assembly of First Nations, which would involve chiefs from all across Canada and representatives of the federal government, including then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. For the first time in Canada, a treaty bundle would be carried by Native runners from Treaty 7 across most of Canada. It was called the Run, which stood for Treaties Honoring Entirely Reserves Under Natives. Some of the Native Studies students, especially those from the Blood Tribe and the Bugani, were going to join in. I don't remember who asked me to join, but as my major was in Native Studies, I had been reading and writing term papers about Native issues and Canada's broken treaty promises. I did not hesitate. Count me in, I told them. I knew I had to get back home and find a summer job. I wanted to get back on the ball diamond and catch up with my friends and family on my own res. But the run was far more important. Even phoned one of my cousins, Jarvis, back in the Okanagan and told him to get on the next bus and come and be one of the runners, and he left immediately. The run took place in early April after our classes were over. Other University of Lethbridge Native American Studies students also dusted off their old moccasins, including Mike Bruisehead, Esther Tailfeathers, Pat Twig, and Narcissus Blood, and joined the run. It took about 22 days for the treaty bundle to be relayed to Ottawa. Mile by mile, runners from the res bombs, old cars and trucks were spread out across the Trans-Canada Highway. Each one would receive the bundle from a runner, and then in turn, they would carry and pass it to the next runner up the road. I was worried about how many of the res bombs would make it to Ottawa and back. Johnny Blood's car was held together with sinew and duct tape. It didn't have much air conditioning, but at least it had a cassette deck. It was one of my first great cultural experiences. I will always be indebted to the Blackfoot people and the grassroots res boys and girls who put up their own money and sacrificed their res bombs to pick up runners along the way. The run was not only a political demonstration, but about broken treaties, but also a spiritual event. We often camped along the highway, and every morning and every night, a medicine man, tiny man from Blackfoot Res in Browning, Montana, would lead the runners in a smudge and prayer and song. On that run, I saw some real res leadership, which I had not known before. I realized you don't need to be elected to chief and council to be a leader. You don't need a boardroom, papers, and an I care speech in a community hall to show real res leadership. Most of the res boys on the run were, he kind of says some things that are kind of mean. But he does talk about Dennis and Sheldon First Rider in a good way. And he talks about a few other folks here in a really good way. And the story he tells here, which takes a couple of pages, is him basically making the decision to run during the night because they recognized that their run was cutting short for the time limit they had, so they had to start running at night. And so he did also bring up Leroy Little Bear. Thinking back, that was one of the most best leadership examples I can think of. And yeah, no one, including me, even noticed the leadership lesson at the time. Our small group of volunteers continued to run well into daylight. We didn't worry about what the others were going to get there to relieve us. I don't think any of us owned a watch. We would get woken up and get out and do our shift and drive the truck or run. When the supporter crew did catch up to us, the night runners all piled into Leroy Little Bear's van and found the best spot to sleep. It was one of the best sleeps I ever had. Leroy Little Bear was a professor and the head of the Native American Studies program at the University of Lethbridge. He had joined the run after exams. He had a nice blue hippie van with no res bomb, and I've always thought that for him and his wife, Amethyst, to volunteer their nice vehicle and time to join the cause says a lot about them. Some Indians can have university educations and live and work in the city, but never forget their res roots, and they stepped up to the plate when needed. Leroy's van took quite a beating on that trip, but personal sacrifices is what res leaders do. Leroy never once told any of the runners to be careful in his fancy van. He sacrificed his vehicle for the cause, just like those who brought their res bombs did. And I thought that was kind of an important thing to talk about because it kind of honors the land that we're on and the people here. And it's funny for some of us who know him as Doctor to be called that. So yeah, I don't know if anybody here identifies as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. So maybe we'll just go around and we can talk about the book, talk about the TED Talk, talk about whatever you'd like. And I'll just start with the participants. Carol, Kat, Rosemary, Marnie, Rebecca, Shelley, Siri, Vanessa, and Wendy. And if anybody wants to be paused at any point in time, please let me know. Because I'm going to be frank, I've not been uploading a lot of the book club ones because afterwards I get 5 messages from 5 people when there were 6 people saying, oh my God, can you take my part out? And that just creates so much editing, it just doesn't go up. So I'm just going to ask you to respect that. And, you know, if you want it, pause, please tell me now. And please don't send me a message tomorrow. I mean, I'll not put it up and that because I want to create a safer space. But, you know, I just want you to recognize if you really feel like you're going to share something that's so personal, you don't want it up, to please just ask me now and to think about that now because you're creating a lot of work, or people are just missing the book clubs altogether because of it. So I'm just going to throw that out there. And Carol, you're first.
Hi, Michelle. I just will reiterate, I'm a settler and I'm here to learn, and I'm learning, and this is a gift to me and I appreciate it. And what I took away from the book was a lot on leadership, very common sense approach. And I actually felt like, oh, this is great. This is great advice. Everybody needs to read this book because it's so practical. It's assured and it works. And the whole leadership, education, and he made me laugh out loud sometimes, like about, you know, get off the phones. Like it's like relevant to everybody. So I came away with more of a kind of a hopeful kind of tone from him. And I mean, he talks about leadership in all domains with the government, you know, individual, collective. And I really appreciated this book quite a bit. So thanks.
Great. Kat, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. I thought it was a fantastic book. I really learned a ton from it, especially about inner workings of the res and words that we use and how they have different meanings, such as elder or warrior. That was really fascinating. I learned a lot about per capita. I didn't know that before, and that's an interesting thing. And yeah, it was a really great book, and I love the TED Talk too. And I agree with everything he says, almost everything, and and he's super right about a lot of things. So I wish him the best. And yeah, I'm a bit sad he's not here, but I completely understand why. I mean, being a leader means, you know, you got to do the work. So yeah, I will pass it along.
Rosemary, you're up next, and then Marnie, you're on deck.
Hi. I only had time to read the first and last chapter, and I'm glad I did because I've heard about him for years in terms of and the economic development that's gone on there. And from the last chapter, definitely, it's, you know, it's obvious that it's not all about economic development. He's very tied into his culture and spirituality. And I think that's so important. And I think the way the media has portrayed him has done a real disservice to him. I've always wondered if he was an example of the nations that Jody Wilson-Raybould talked about in her book, From Where I Stand, about, you know, that need for nation-to-nation relationships, community development, getting rid of the Indian Act, you know, as he said, being independent of that structure that's been created through Indian affairs. I loved the talk. I think I could sit and listen to him for hours. If we had any chance of bringing him here for a future session, I would be all for it. A session just on him and what he has to say. And I can't wait to actually read the book now. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I haven't finished the book, but boy, it's sure engaging. And today when I was cooking, I couldn't be reading, so I found him on YouTube and a talk. It was an interview with some white guy, I can't remember. Oh shoot, what's his name? Anyway, I don't remember, but the thing that he struck me then, and this is, I guess, I mean, I am only partway through, but this is one of the things that has come up for me is he's not always gentle with his fellow Indigenous people. You know, he criticizes, but he doesn't do that and not criticize the crown and the settler and the colonial system. He's so critical of that. And it seems to me so important that that information gets out to the average Canadian. I mean, most Canadians don't know the truth of the settling of this country, and the way he brings it out as part of his discussion of leadership. I just am finding it very engaging and very illuminating, and I appreciate it. And today on this YouTube thing that I found, I don't know what he said after this because I got stopped here and I couldn't pause it because my hands were all messy, but he talked about how every year some white guy in a business suit comes with a suitcase full of $5 bills and gives out $5 because when the treaties were signed in the 1870s, $5 is what was owed to every Indigenous person. And so now you can do the math, 2021, when he was doing this, we give out $5 for every Indigenous person. And his assumption is that between 1870 and now, $5 is not really the same beast. And that's similar to what I'm finding in the book. I'm just learning a lot about the history of this country by reading this book. And I think, and by listening to him in other ways. So I appreciate it. And if you are here, I'd love to listen because he's quite engaging. And can I just find one quote that I found that really kind of blew my mind? And it didn't blow my mind, it called me to action. This is it. You know, we talk about the treaties. And this is Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. He said, "My father claimed that no man owned any part of the earth, and a man could not sell what he did not own." You know, those are words, but they strike me very profoundly. So I don't think I said anything very sensible, but I'm deep in the book and I'm really appreciating it and I'm learning a lot from it. And so I'm glad, as usual, Michelle, you chose a book that I'm really glad to have read and that I might not have read otherwise. So thank you.
Yeah, thank my dad. Actually, he got me this for Christmas. And I'm not gonna lie. So what you described about when he doesn't pull a punch on other natives is actually called lateral violence and internalized racism, and it is a structure created thanks to racism and white supremacy. And it's, you know, if you didn't know about the $5 treaty money that we get, I highly, highly, highly recommend, 1, going to the Blackfoot Crossing, 2, reading Clearing of Plains, 3, learning more about the Indian Act, because like this is like standard stuff. And ironically, I haven't had the opportunity to do that with my own nation because I've never lived there and I've never been there for treaty days. And treaty days in my nation is not like a holiday here. So like I would have to go out of my way, take time off to go to it and participate in that. And most natives don't. But that's why we always joke about the $5. We joke about $5 all the time because that is the $5 we were meant to have. And the one time my cousin got married and I went to the Indian band office, I was able to fill out a form that gave me the $5 that I've been owed since I got my status in C31. Not since, you know, I was born, but because the Indian Act and the way the Canadian government has set up the Indian Act, and that I wasn't able to get status until after 85. I wasn't entitled to any of that $5 prior to the 1985. And that pisses me off to this day. And it pisses me off that my daughter won't be entitled to any of her status money. And it pisses me off that they give us $5. And it pisses me off that they won't give it to me if I'm not there. And a lot of us make jokes about it. You can't even buy taco in a bag for $5. So every year at Treaty 7 for this day, you get together with the stupid fucking RCMP who's in his red surge and they think it's great and everybody takes a picture because it's so fun. Let's play colonialism. And they give us our $5. And we go through the process and grab our $5. Like, I'm not joking. It's a stack of like $5 bills and they mark you off on the fucking list like a bunch of fucking pricks. Like I hate that ceremony so much, but it gets done all across this nation every fucking year. And we're supposed to smile and nod in the face of the RCMP. And that's why until they understand their role in colonialism and do their own apology and do some changes and like it's such a fucking sick joke. It's sick. It's like if I made an analogy that would make it worse, I'm sure. If I talked about, you know, the Jewish people and the Germans, like I'm sure it would be really gross and sick. And this is Canada and the average Canadian doesn't know it. And it's sick. It's the sickest thing I've ever seen. And it's just normalized here. So I think we'll move on to, so Clearing the Plains is a good one and Lost Harvests. Read those two books if you want to know more about
Lost Harvest, you said?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and it yeah, I won't say anything more.
Yeah, it's gross. Rebecca, then Shelley, Siri, Vanessa, and Wendy.
Hello. I wasn't able to get the book, so I haven't read it. I was really here more to listen, if that's okay.
Sure, Rebecca. Do you identify as a settler or as First Nation?
Oh, yes, I'm a settler.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Shelley?
I read the book front to back, and I'm really thankful that you chose it for many reasons. I just want to read this quote by James Baldwin because he was talking about a lot about Martin Luther King. But this sparked a memory about James Baldwin. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. So you can argue about whether pineapple goes on pizza, but what we're talking about, you can't deny. So I liked that I agreed. I don't think that I did notice the lateral violence. I do understand where he's coming from. Like the hand out instead of hand up. I think it's what he's talking about, and because if any marginalized group is in poverty and and has to do boil water, how are they supposed to go out and look for jobs? Like you don't have money for food. So if you don't have your basic house rights, not rights, that's the wrong word, your basic needs, like your survival needs met, you're not going to be able to go look for a job. So I think it's business and helping everyone on the community. I think that it's not binary, it's a spectrum that I agree the per capita doesn't seem like it is a good idea. I'm not in that position, I'm not a politician. It makes sense to put it to 7 generations ahead, but the government needs to step up to make sure that basic rates are filled under UNDRIP, so that the communities can get business. But then I was thinking, okay, that's great for Sutina, that's right by here, that can get Costco and a gas station. But what about Northern Alberta, a res that has nothing around it, or like where are they supposed to go? So I'm thinking it's not so cut and dry, or not cut. Sorry, I'm trying to explain. I've been really thinking a lot about this. Like, I get where he's coming from, and it makes sense for reses that are around towns and around cities, but it's not going to work for every single res. And it needs to, it's like both and. It's like taking his ideas and maybe tailoring it to each individual res, but you got to get the basic rights, human rights done, and then it's maybe get the business but still have the social services, because we're still or not we, but like the Indigenous people are still dealing with intergenerational trauma that needs to be unpacked, so that it doesn't go on for other generations, and it still needs to be unpacked, and there's still going to be disabilities because of the genocides. So the social services still needs to be there, and it is the absolute 100% responsibility of the government to actually put more money into it, because I was absolutely horrified when I heard INAC, I don't know what it's called now, that they only pay for certain teeth. Like, for fuck's sakes, you pay for the whole teeth. Like, so I think I'm glad that he was blunt and says that, but it is what it is because of colonialism. And yeah, I'm gonna stop.
Well, I appreciate the point you made when Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau were talking about universal healthcare. I started laughing immediately and joked that maybe that means that Indian Affairs will either have a better plier plan than because the average Canadian would not put up with that. No way. But for us, we've always had to, right? And they would rather us die from illness that is totally and completely preventable than to actually just invest the money and give it the green light. So I myself have been watching this so-called dental concept, universal dental concept, because it's like, okay, but like if you are a 12-year-old kid and you are white, how is it different than if you're Native? Right? Like, these are things I'm watching for, because I've always known, and I've said it a million times on my podcast, so I'm a little hurt to hear it tonight, that people didn't understand. We don't get dollar-to-dollar funding. We've never gotten it. It's never been a thing. So it's chronic underfunding. It's chronic imposed poverty. And the fact that that's still not understood by average Joe Canadian, part of the reason why I was afraid to even bring this as a book club option more so was because when you have a group of people that really don't understand racism, let alone systemic racism, let alone colonial policy that's rooted in systemic racism, of course you're not going to fucking understand lateral violence. You're not. A lot of Natives don't get it, frankly, even though they perpetuate it and live under it, but that's what racism does. So I was afraid to even have this as a book club selection, frankly, because I still understand that people don't understand systemic racism, right? So and that, like, the dental is just one tiny piece as an example of it. Like, we're talking about all of the systems that every other Canadian takes for granted, that we never have gotten on reserve ever, right? So, like, we don't have clean drinking water, we don't have broadband services, we don't have EMS, we don't have fire departments. Like, any other Canadian would lose their panties. But for Indigenous, it's like, oh, well, no biggie. And people wonder why we are so bitter and angry and why we have to be so kind about the truth. It's bullshit. So anyway, I'm going to pause.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa. I was here maybe about a year ago, but then this one here happened. And so I've been away for many important conversations, but listening to your podcast, Michelle, and always grateful for all you do, and all the learning that comes from all your work. And so I was excited about tonight because she has a lot to say too. I listened to the book. I don't have the possibility of reading a physical book this day because baby chews on everything. So, but I bought the audiobook and I really appreciate it, that it's narrated by him. So it was like a different experience. And I really felt like it just felt so personal that I was listening to him and his, life story. And it's really, I mean, as much as I disagree with some of the things he said, and that's the way it is, but I believe that it's a masterclass in public administration and leadership. My husband teaches at a university and he teaches a business administration program, and I immediately told him that it should be a required reading for business programs and for administration programs and management and programs here in Canada, because it's really, that's the way I could describe it. It's a masterclass in public administration because, it felt so down to earth, so based on his own experience, and we're not hearing about, some management or leadership theory. Like, he's actually been in that position for so long that, he's seen it all. And I was so so grateful to learn about him. I had heard about him before, and just like you, Siri, I thought that, I was just, there's prejudice around, for me as a socialist, like, around capitalism and about how things are done, and, some internalized racism in many ways, because I've seen it in my people in Mexico, and, we have our very decolonial ways of doing things, and some people come with, they studied abroad in some whatever economics PhD, and they come with all these ideas that are so disconnected from what we do and how we interact with each other. And I've been a critic of that, but I just felt like I had to stop so many times just to think about, like, this man has navigated, an imposed colonial settler economic system, and he has to make peace with how things work in many ways so that his people get the most out of it. And that's just negotiating, life, and just being a responsible leader and making it work, right? Just making it work. And I just, and there were, I felt that the chapters were so thematic, like, so like there were themes to them, and they were very different from another. Like there was a linear story, which was his life story and his life as a chief, but I thought that some of the tones he used throughout the book were so different. Like when he's talking about res lingo, there's lots of humor around it, but then there's this chapter about residential schools, and it's, really somber, really just, I just had to stop. I just had to pause the audiobook so many times, right? And I actually stopped my car because I will listen to it on my way to work. And I work right across Callaway Park. So it's a Springbank area. So when you're driving there, you see the Rockies, right? Like it's this beautiful view. And I will always see, that beautiful view, and thought of like how grateful I am, being able to raise my family here and just live here. But it was, it was the most meaningful coincidence that I was listening to the chapter when he talks about sacred burial sites and how they were trying to have like this provincial park built there. And I literally had to stop in the highway. Like I had to stop the car when he described that conversation he had with a government official, and he asked like, how many years have to pass for your ancestors' graves not to matter anymore? And he phrases in a way that it's just so bone chilling and so I just really had to stop the car and actually, wow, just like I out loud said wow. And I was by myself, but and I actually like rewinded it and listened to that again, because I feel that it's like such like, you know, such a succinct, brief question that Canadians have to ask themselves when they're discussing these energy projects. So that's why when, you know, when I, you know, listened earlier to that criticism around, you know, energy projects and all of that, like I just go back to that chapter and I just think like, you know, there's things that we might not agree with, but definitely it was a lot to take in, and I was just really appreciative of how he narrated everything. And I literally cried at the end because it's narrated by him, and when he talks about the last dance and how he wants his life to be celebrated, and like after finishing the chapter, I went and played, like I stopped and played in Spotify what was it's Indian Car, or what's the song called by what is it called, yeah, right, like Indian Car, no, yes. And I played it like really, really loud. It felt like, you know, it felt like I knew him personally some way. And it was like a very real book to me. Like it was just very, very personal. And yeah, so anyways, I really enjoyed learning more about, you know, wrestling go, and you know, as Kat mentioned, like per capita, and just listening to a different perspective on sports logos and all of that. It just always seemed to me that like there's just this one way, but I don't know, I felt like, you know, maybe being open to other opinions. I'm very just this way is the right way, and so it challenged my views, definitely, so I appreciated that. So thank you, Michelle.
Oh, that's great feedback. Geez, I might take like clips of what you just said and like put them out there to encourage people to watch this one. So I appreciate all of the things that you said, and I'm sure he will. So I think I might just send him like the clip of where you were speaking and say, hey, really want you to listen to this piece here from Vanessa. So thank you. Wendy, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Thank you. And wow, Vanessa, you gave so many good things to think about. It's hard to go next. Anyway, thank you for this chance, Michelle, to speak. I am Wendy, and I go by she and her, and I'm a settler on Treaty 7. I'm halfway through the book right now. Really appreciate the reflections that everyone has been sharing tonight, because I couldn't quite figure out what my feelings were about this book. I think when I first got it, what I found, I guess, a little bit unsettling were all the quotes on the front cover from different prime ministers. I was like, I couldn't quite figure out what it was selling. I was like, where are we going with this? And so anyway, I was finding that interesting. And then it definitely does, as others have pointed out, really speaks to issues of leadership. I really appreciated that. And I really appreciate, like many of the books that we've read, I think these are the kinds of books many people need to read, so that we get the human side of leadership and we understand enough of their perspective that their decisions and their approaches can make sense. So I think I really appreciate that he took the time to write this book. I really liked how he even opened it and really gave a story as to what was his driving thoughts to want to write it down and share it. And I think what I'm taking away that that I'm still reflecting on quite a bit as I go through each chapter is the length of the leadership vision that he emphasizes, and that he points out that many Indigenous leaders think in that 7 generations mindset. I noticed that a lot because that is not where white settlers are used to thinking about leadership. But I think it's so necessary for us to ask ourselves questions that are generational and think about things well beyond. I have also reflected on the fact that he's been in leadership for several decades, and just that's got complexity to it too. And so I don't have any answers to those things, but just really appreciated his reflections. Really appreciate just his writing style being so direct. It's very easy to read and kind of flow through thinking about these issues. He does such a nice job of different points in time and what things meant to him. So, but yeah, I think the generations thinking and the vision that's behind that is something that I, as a white settler, don't hear enough about. Don't hear enough about thinking of things well beyond their own lifetime. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of this book that he brings out in a few ways. But thanks as well for everyone noting the things that were, either a struggle or places where you disagreed with thoughts in the book, because that's helping me unpack my own thinking about it too. Thanks.
Oh man, I knew like we'd all want to discuss it, like the patriarchy. I knew it all would make us all feel uncomfortable. And that's why I was so nervous about this book club coming up, because I was just, when we have special guests, obviously they just talk and we let them talk. But I still felt like, geez, maybe we should do a follow-up one where we all have to unpack it. So I'm really grateful for the conversations that are happening here. Carol, you wrote something really nice, and I know Marnie and Shelley wanted to speak, so I'm just going to pause it. I'm going to give it Marnie, Shelley, Carol, and then Rosemary a chance to speak.
No problem with it whatsoever. I mean, I think what I'm saying is the way that I feel, and like I surrender to my white privilege. There's no doubt in my mind that my whiteness has given me passage through some situation it wouldn't. I don't have to think about being handcuffed outside of a bank because I am white skinned. I don't have to think about that. Like the Indigenous grandfather and his 12-year-old granddaughter. I don't have to think about that. There's also a lot of, I saw the lateral kind of racism. I also saw the patriarchy. I am an ardent feminist and I see it. But I also understand this. He's at the whims of patriarchy as much as women are. And there it was. There it was. And so he's learned how to negotiate it. And he's he could do some work. Like honestly, he really could do some work on that. And I understand when women or when men say, I don't know what women want or something like that. It's because they haven't put work into it to understand. So it was not lost on me, but I have to stop because sometimes comments in the book could light my ass on fire and I had to close it. So, I mean, there it is. It's recorded for the world to hear.
That's good.
And you're welcome to put what I posted in. Do you want me to read it or?
Yeah, sure.
Well, what I said is I really like Shelley's comments and she's right on. And as well, as Siri says, male privilege was highly evident and it wasn't lost on me at all. Male privilege, like white privilege, works for the few who own it. So it remains unchallenged a great deal of the time. In fact, most of the time, right? And I like the idea of leadership and some practical tips he offers, like show up. And I would add to that, white people show up here. And so there's some really harsh moments in the book, but if I'm focused just on how horrified I feel about what I learned, it puts an undeserving emphasis or focus on my feelings, not on what I'm learning. You see what I'm, thank you, you got it. Not the truths I'm learning. So, good.
No, I appreciate that, Carol. That's awesome. Rosemary, do you mind if Vanessa goes, only because she has a little one? Or
No, of course not. Of course not.
okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment real quick that so we in Mexico we had the same political party for 81 years, and it was a right-wing party all along, and it was like a de facto dictatorship for the longest time. And then we finally had a leftist president. We fought for him to win. I campaigned for him since I was 18 until even being here in Canada, I continued to campaign for that guy, right? And so he's a boomer. He had other ideas growing up, and his leadership it's very much like Chief Clarence Louie. And so that's his leadership style. We work hard, we work with honesty, democratic principles. You know, I'm a teacher. Finally got the opportunity to teach social these years, and it happened. I was teaching democracy at the same time as I was listening to him talking about hereditary chiefs versus elected chiefs. And so it was not lost on me, of course, that, you know, he did mention, like, I don't know enough about hereditary chiefs to talk about it, but he did talk about, you know, voting and the democratic system. And so, and I kept thinking about our president in Mexico and how he's been highly criticized for some very patriarchal, very macho things, very misogynistic comments that he's made. And at the same time, he's doing a fantastic job as a president, but he does have these views that are a product of how he grew up and how he, you know, was educated, and the ideas and the political movements that he participated in. And I don't know, I just want to be fair, you know, I just want to be fair with the greater good that's done, you know. And of course, you know, I also noticed that I had to stop. It was a hard read at some point, but I just want to be fair with the work that's being done. And that's what I ask from people in Mexico who criticize, like, radical feminists that are going towards him and just, yeah, but at the same time, you know, when he's creating jobs for everyone. And when he's, you know, doing these things for his people, he's doing it for everyone, right? And when he's thinking about future generations, he's also thinking about everyone. So perhaps we can stop, you know, demanding perfection, right? And just take some learnings in, just like what was said earlier, like what the last speaker said about, if I focus on how uncomfortable I feel, then I'm missing out on the great learnings on the book. I just want to be fair with other generations. I don't know, it's a conflicting feeling for sure. And you know me, Michelle, like, I'm an NDP through and through, and I'm a feminist and all of these things. And but it's just, I just want to be fair, you know. We're not demanding perfection from white leaders, and then or from people who are writing books, and suddenly we are asking him to talk about every single Indigenous issue. Like, he didn't talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Is it a shame? Yes, it's a shame, but it's, you know, it's his book, and he prioritized certain things. Unfortunately, he didn't talk about this very important issue. But again, like, when Justin Trudeau wrote his book, when other white politicians write their books, we're not demanding that they talk about every single issue, right? I don't know. It's conflicting for sure, but just keeping fairness in mind and appreciating the learnings while staying critical, right?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Rosemary, I know you've been patient. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. I've been learning a lot listening to people, and I really regret that I haven't read all of the book. But certain questions came to mind. Is some of our discomfort because he's so upfront with his pro-capitalist views? He's so upfront with what I hear are very patriarchal views, and a lot of other people, they have those views. It's just they don't put them out there in the same way. And when it comes to capitalism, yes, okay, so you have corporate, the corporate sector loving him and praising him, but where were they when the Lubicon, before they got their land claim, came up with a development plan for their community that would have tied into capitalism? They were going to grow and sell wild rice. They were going to do something with cranberries. There were a lot of things they were going to do that would have meant interacting with the capitalist system. And whether you like it or not, you're a traditional hunter and trapper, you're interacting with that system. But the other interesting thing about what the Lubicon wanted to do, and I would like to know how this plays out in Osoyoos, is they wanted to create things for the community, like a recreation center for all of the youth. They wanted to have a nursing home for their seniors, so they would not have to leave the community where they wouldn't be hearing their language, where they couldn't be eating country food. And they wanted to combine that with a childcare center, which one would have assisted women in the community, but two was to bring children and elders together, which was because traditionally children learned from grandparents. So I really want to know more about how things function on the ground at Osoyoos. So there's economic development, there are jobs. How many women are working now as a result of that economic development? Is there a discrepancy between the kinds of jobs men have and the kinds of jobs women have? I don't know. I would really like to talk to people from that community to know how it plays out on the ground. So that's all I have to say. And thank you for warning me that I'm going to be triggered by certain comments when I do read it. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, folks. Does anybody else, would they like to call? We're a little late, so thank you for staying on. And Kat, thank you so much for sending that link earlier today in that email. It's in our link for folks who didn't know. Jody Wilson-Raybold's new book is coming out, and she's going to be here in Calgary at WordFest. And it is a charge. I think it was $20 or something. I couldn't remember, but I had to use my credit card in order to go. So, but I did book myself a ticket, and encourage you all to, if you want to. You don't have to by any stretch, but most likely what'll be in our roster next year will be this. So she'll be I think she is the author we've probably read the most, actually, maybe Sarah Carter, but anyway, just kind of encouraging that as well. And then we have Bruce McIver said he'd come in December, so we'll read the next section of the MMIW inquiry report for folks who are interested. And I find that every time we talk about that one's really triggering for a lot of folks, so they may not I'm not putting up the MMIW ones on my podcast or my YouTube channel, only because I get all these messages the next day from people saying, oh, can you take out my part? And it's like, well, no, I'm just not gonna, I don't have the time and energy to edit out all of those requests, so I just don't. So I encourage people to read it though, and I think next to MMIW one, I just won't even bother with the recording. at all, just because it's obviously too triggering for people. And it sucks because it's like, okay, well, that's great. That's like, you know, a few of us are very open and honest about what it's like to actually be an Indigenous woman in Canada. And I'd like to tell those stories, but I find that for some folks, it's just too triggering to listen to. And which sucks, because it's like, this might be their only way to do it. So I don't know what the right answer is, but what does matter is that you're all committed, you all come, and I'm grateful for it. I've seen a lot of you at the Sisters in Spirit Vigil and the Truth and Reconciliation Day, so thank you. And yeah, I hope we can continue moving on as we go. And thank you, Kat, for that link. Did you want to talk at all about Settler Book Club and the next books coming up?
Certainly. Thank you for that, Michelle. Settlers Book Club is coming up in 2 weeks, and we are doing 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. I just started it today, and you want triggering, start reading this book, because it is a fictional account of 5 people who went to residential schools, and it's brutal. It's brutal. So get ready for it. It's going to be a tough read. But after that, I think we have Me Tomorrow, which is edited by, hang on. Me Tomorrow, Indigenous Views on the Future by Drew Hayden Taylor, compiled by, that's our November book, and we're taking December off. So, because it's too much around the holidays and such. But I just wanted to say I am so grateful for all of you, and especially Michelle, who puts up with us and who teaches us and has so much patience and does it with love and swear words. I like it. Swear words sometimes need to be used.
If I have to know English, can't I use it to emphasize my points? I don't know. But Marnie made the point about Michelle Good's 5 Little Indians. It should be required reading. I think, for me, I'm just like, God, what story will it take for Canadians to understand how different our lives are? So if this is the one, awesome. But I know that this book, Chief Clarence Louie's Res Rules, was a really good one for us. I'm really glad it challenged us all. I think I loved what Vanessa said, that every business admin should have to read this book. And 21 things that you didn't know about the Indian Act is a good start for something like this, so that you can understand a little more why this book matters. I don't think if we would have done this book before that book, or maybe before a few others, that this would have resonated. So yeah, I'm really grateful to walk this journey with you all. Thank you all for coming.